get time to just put some more of our interesting analysis and contributions to the discussion here onto the record. So how's it been going with you anyway?
Oh, good.
Good?
Not bad. I'm going to be spending some time at a lake in the next couple of weeks, so it'll be cool. So where are you? You're in...
It's just a real beautiful paradise. There's just all like long, huge cow fields and horse pastures and like rows of corn.
Springs. There's springs all over the place.
Oh, yeah.
And there were 3 springs right there on my flight.
Yeah, I'm right on them. I'm right on springs yet, but I want to go check it out. I saw the sign for it. I just haven't been in there yet, which is kind of sad. I should go over there soon. I should have went there today. Yeah, no, so I think that as we look at the news and the analysis, I think people are pretty shocked by the different events that are coming about that seem to be so random. So now we're hearing more about the baby food shortage, and it seems as though a lot of the shutdown of the baby food plants was actually ordered by the FDA. So as things as the information starting to come out, people are wondering why there was this unnecessary recall of baby food, and at the same time, they're like shipping it all away to other places, and they basically created. Looks like the FDA was involved in creating this shortage. So I was just reading an article where the babies who are getting sick, quote unquote, I got my fingers doing the quotations, quote unquote, sick, and go to the doctors because they don't have any formula. The doctors don't have any extra. They don't have any solution to the problem. So I think that some babies are going to get hurt here. You know.
Well, to put pressure on legislators, one of the key things is showing that children are in danger. There's the baby food. There is, I don't know if you probably don't remember, but in Desert Shield, when Saddam Hussein went into Kuwait, supposedly his soldiers were going into hospitals throwing babies out of incubators, and in Russia they bombed the children. You know, they hit the school or whatever facility it was where children were, and apparently children were marked outside. You know, where they could see it by plane. You know, I don't know if it's real or if baby food's being held back. I don't know.
Right. No, I mean, we're both in the position where we have, our kids are grown and we don't have like a necessity for baby food. But you know, when people need formula, they need it on stock regularly, cans and cans of it, just the baby just eaten. You know, you just go into town, so you have to keep them fed. So if you have to start driving around, apparently there's 8 different states. This is just, of course, I haven't done like a scientific study to know if this is even true. I get you. But it looks like from what I'm hearing that, I mean, they can play it off like, oh, there's no problem here. But from the sounds that I'm hearing, there's certain areas that are really can't find it. So it's kind of becoming a deal. Even Microsoft, when I go to my Microsoft network for my browser to do like a search, they're bringing up news stories, you know, regarding this whole issue. So I'm starting to wonder.
Well, you had mentioned earlier the Gunpowder fiasco and Guy Foxe.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I want to just, you know, to have a discussion about it and include it into the larger conversation, because when I look for kind of a smart conversation, like any kind of like new, you can go to the history, channel.com or something and see a little write-up about it, but there's not really any good discussion about the large-scale view of history that shows these kind of coordinated, you know, grand geopolitical attacks that are deception. Of course, all war is based on deception, of course. But I think that what we're dealing with in the United States right now, this kind of like this Machiavellian level of contempt for the people. So you have this this kind of elite, this oligarchy that seems to be running Washington, D.C., and they have no problem using their crazy, tortured political logic to try to suggest that we should all have abortions because babies are too expensive to feed. So that's the kind of like rhetoric we've been hearing coming from these individuals. And so I'm starting to see now that I think that there is a grand narrative and a grand shape taking form here as our elite, the elite classes, the political classes are really turning against the American people. And I think that we can see we have a long ways to go with Biden and Harris. And all he has to do is sign a few papers, and he can start the machinery of the military state apparatus and point those forces at whoever he wants. So that's why I was discussing this issue of the Gunpowder plot of 1605, which people don't know anything about it typically. And also, we were also discussing the St. Bartholomew Day Massacre in France, which was a similar duplicity where they invited all the Huguenots into Paris for a great noble wedding between Henry of Navarre, who was a Huguenot, and the French princess, who was a Catholic. And of course, the mother was Catherine Medici, so she was not too happy. She was nonplussed, let's say. And in the middle of this celebration, it reminds me of the Red Wedding on Game of Thrones. They turn on Colonel Coligny and they turn on the Huguenots, who of course don't have any swords. They're there to celebrate. And they bring out the hatchet men and they kill some 50,000 Huguenots. And the massacre extends all outside of the provinces of France, too. It just kind of starts in France and kind of continues for a week. And they just slaughter all the Huguenots they can find. So, yeah, that's the kind of duplicity and sudden terrible violence you can expect from the political leaders or when they're being controlled by Rome. So if they've been to Georgetown University, if they are people who right, they're people who
Donald Trump,
right. No, Donald Trump is a guy who is a Manhattan billionaire. So you can see that it wasn't easy. It wasn't that difficult for him to organize what they're calling the new right.
Well, the problem is that so many people don't understand that they group the Christians in one mass population, and they don't understand the Reformation, and they don't understand that Catholicism is really sun worship. It's not Christianity.
Right.
And I have Catholic people in my family, and we can't discuss that at all.
No, but it's true.
And the persecution of the Catholics, I can understand that, but it's nothing compared to the persecution of the Inquisition.
Right.
And I read a statistic that it was 100 million people killed in the Inquisition.
Right. No, I think you're right. I mean,
and that's nothing compared to the Catholic. But the thing is, the Protestants did the same thing. At some point, it's got to stop.
No, I think
we'll ever get there. I think our world is too chaotic for it to ever stop. I don't have much hope for humanity. I do think we're in the last stage.
No, I think you're totally right. I mean, it's really hard to argue with that analysis. I mean, you can understand in history at previous times when things were really terrible and there were terrible wars, people could have imagined that they were at the end. But I think now we have this technotronic control grid that ties in with the bank debiting process and with your social security number and the system of IDing people and requiring it by law. You're mandated to have these physical biometric data collecting. It's getting intense, so that it all ties in ultimately with the system of passports. And when you get into the system of making the laws that govern passports, right? then you're getting into a level of internationalism and international law that's really high up, because ultimately you have to make a system of laws that can cause all the different nations of the world to be in agreement on what documentation people will accept if they are passing through. If you have to go to Turkey, or if you have to go to Japan, or if you have to go to Saudi Arabia, and this system of bound borders between countries that ultimately has like a series of gateways that you can pass through with your passport is the system of globalism and internationalism itself. So that's what we're dealing with. You're dealing with ultimately, we call it the UCC, or the Uniform Commercial Code, and the UCC is something that governs and creates the rules on how banks will operate, and how the actual courts will be set up, and all the actual particular details. So people should look into the Uniform Commercial Code, and it's kind of a dense, impenetrable subject matter that presupposes that they have already created the rules of the world. And ultimately, but we're kind of getting on a tangent with that. But I think the point is that we're getting to this point now in American history where Americans forgot that they revolted against the king and the pope. And that's not allowed. So you can let a couple hundred years go by, but the same king of England, that same throne, and the same papal throne in the Vatican, they're still seated there, and they're still nonplussed, right? They're still not happy with the heretic nation of America, the Protestant and Baptist roots of our revolution, our revolt. We rebelled. And the same thing happened when Martin Luther in 1517 discovered that the Gospels, right? He got saved all of a sudden. He was reading the Gospels and the letters of Paul, and other people couldn't read them, of course, because they were all serfs and they were all illiterate. But he was a highly trained scholar, and he could read the Greek. And he suddenly realized that the Vatican was not at all aligned with what was written in the Gospels, in the Scriptures. So that's where the Protestant Reformation began. And ultimately, when they began to give people the Scriptures, and they over there, if you look at John Calvin in France, when he started to put the Scriptures out in the French language, and the people read it, they started to realize that the system of the papacy that governed the kings and governed all the nobility and governed all the laws, that system of geopolitical power that called itself the church, was really just a fraud. And so the same thing happened with John Huss and with the different reformers as they began to realize, and ultimately get to the Gutenberg press, and you get to this point where King James is going to print out the Bible in English, because it's very popular. This is a huge it's almost a democratic move at this point. It's very popular with the people, and it's a way to stick his thumb in the eye of the Pope, and he will print out on the Gutenberg printing press the King James Bible. And so that's where you'll arrive at this point in history when the Jesuits especially are going to try to blow up King James in the Parliament in 1605 in the Gunpowder Plot. So that was their answer. When they couldn't get their way, they would blow it up.
They almost did. It was they discovered it at midnight, I think, the day before, under all these barrels of gunpowder, enough to destroy Parliament over 20 times. And
so
they discovered it under a pile of wood, and then they were tipped off, possibly. Some of the conspirators that were going to blow it up. Well, at least one of them. I think his name is Cassidy. But they think he tipped them off.
So was he English? Maybe he was feeling guilty, or he realized it was coming down to the wire.
No, I think he was just not ambivalent, but he was wishy-washy a bit. Yeah, I should have brought it up because I can't remember his name. It's like Catesby.
Catesby, yeah. I have a little write-up here. I'll just read it. Headed by Robert Catesby, the Gunpowder Treason Plot, or the Jesuit plot, aimed to blow up England's state opening of Parliament and assassinate King James I on November 5th, 1605. The plotters were indignant when about the treatment of Catholics under their Protestant rulers, and they intended to restore. They intended to restore a Catholic freedom and control, and probably a Catholic king, I imagine. However, their scheme was discovered and reported at midnight of November 4th. Authorities discovered 36 barrels of gunpowder stashed under one of the Houses of Parliament. As one of the most momentous occasions in all British history, large celebrations take place on November 5th every year to commemorate the foiling of the gunpowder plot. Always wondered about that, like when they do Guy Fawkes Day, is it to celebrate his failure, or is it to somehow, now it seems like
as a sense.
Right, now it seems like with these new masks, everyone wants to wear the, what do they call it? They call it the anonymous mask, but they don't realize that it's Guy Fawkes, and it's really part of you're really wearing the mask of the Jesuit conspirator who was going to kill King James, and of course that would have ended the printing of the King James Bible, which is so famous, of course.
Yeah.
So I think that he was saved. I think that you can see that these guys were radicalized at a political level, and they were willing to kill, like you would say, terrorists today. These were Catholic terrorists, and I think ultimately the wars. There was a 30 years war that would go on. It would take place, and it was all regarding the Catholic kings versus the Protestant kings and the Protestant princes who were not willing to accept the authority of the Pope. And so this is really the foundation history of Europe, and it has everything to do with framing the actual existing nature of America. So we came here, our forefathers came here and set up a Protestant republic with no king, no monarch, and no pope to rule over us, but we were here to, since we had virtue and we had our Bibles and gunpowder, we could rule ourselves.
Yeah.
So I think that it's interesting that people now are wondering at the crazy circumstances with the election. I don't know at the motives of somebody like Trump and Biden, but it just seems like to me that they're being pitted against each other and in this remarkable kind of Hegelian dialectic, like you were bringing up before.
Well, they're polarized. They're so polarized, and the two parties are more polarized than ever. And everybody's going to be united on the divider, and it just keeps getting worse.
All right, so that's good. Yeah, as we're just kind of continuing the conversation, I'll just introduce this next little article here. I'll read it. It's really brief. Guy Fawkes Day, the Jesuit treason and gunpowder plot. A plan was hatched by a joint collaboration of the Pope and the Jesuits to blow up the House of Lords during the state opening of Parliament on the 5th of November, 1605. Robert Catesby was the leader of the group of English Catholics who plotted to assassinate the Protestant King James I in a failed gunpowder plot. Guy Fawkes, a key member of the group, was chosen to bomb the Parliament owing to his experience as a soldier in the Spanish army. He smuggled 36 barrels of gunpowder into a cellar directly below the Parliament, which was enough to obliterate the entire building, thereby killing all the key members of the state, including the king and high-ranking officials. However, through the divine providence, an anonymous letter was sent to the Catholic called William Parker, who was a member of the Parliament. The letter warned him to stay away from the opening of the Parliament. Alarmed by this, he brought this to the attention of King James, who then ordered the search of the basement of the Parliament. Guy Fawkes was found hiding in one of the cellars, guarding a stash of gunpowder explosives. And after being tortured, Guy Fawkes revealed that this was a pre-planned Jesuit-led Catholic conspiracy to annihilate England's Protestant government and replace it with a Catholic one. I guess that would be a Catholic king in the waiting. A couple notes here. The gunpowder plot is also known as the Jesuit treason because it was a primary mastermind by Jesuits. Originally, the effigies of the Pope were burnt, but later they were replaced with effigies of Guy Fawkes. It was even celebrated in the colonial United States and was called the Pope Night because effigies of the Pope and the Devil were burnt and hung from trees. So that's an interesting little addition here. This whole little article, I will make sure I include it in the show notes so that you can take a gander at it yourself when you have time. and it's all about the Catholic geopolitical strategy of trying to destroy kings that they consider heretical, and trying to destroy any kind of political leaders that they feel like are in their way. They anathematize them with anathemas, so to speak, and they curse them as heretics, and then they send their Jesuit agents over to try to murder people. And that's something they've been doing for centuries. But no, we were talking about the nature of the Counter-Reformation and the Gunpowder Plot of 1605, where they had carefully and secretly planted the barrels of gunpowder because they wanted to desperately get rid of the Protestant King James I there. He was deftly maneuvering between the papacy and the Anglican reformers in order to have his Bible printed, which was, of course, a heresy, and it was on the list of banned books, the index, you have to say, the index of banned books.
Yeah.
So, but they were going to blow them up. That was their way of serving God and changing the geopolitical landscape. And it didn't seem like it was a problem for them because they were serving the greater glory of God and so on. So if they had to blow up those people, then it all served heaven.
I like to wonder how. I like to think about how the church rationalizes things like that, killing people. I mean, I guess if they're fighting against Satan.
Right. They have to establish their kingdom of God from the Vatican here on earth, and anybody who resists it is satanic. So, obviously. So, if you don't come in and see how great the Pope is and that he's the image of Christ, right? The image of Christ in the house of God, and they don't submit to him, then they're going against God, right?
Yep, I guess so.
Yeah, I mean, I guess his divinity, which is so unique, is political in nature. So, lots of other priests and religious people go around, but they don't pretend to have sovereignty and royal power. So apparently he's literally the king of the nation state there of the Vatican. So he's a royal dignitary. So.
Yeah, there was a time when he was totally infallible. Now he's only infallible ex cathedra when he's speaking officially, or when he's writing his bulls he was a god king for a while. The Pope, they were.
Yeah, the meridian of his power when he could just point his finger and declare kings to do what he wanted, and he was always struggling for that total dominance. And then, of course, pesky Islam came along and didn't submit, so they wanted to resist.
Well, I think Islam was a creation of the Catholic Church. Muhammad's wife, Khadijah, she was the older one. She was raised in a convent, and she supplied all the money to Muhammad. She was rich.
Right.
And I'm not alone in saying that there are a lot of sources that point to the Catholic Church creating Islam.
Yeah, at that time it was the Augustinian monks in the area who were really the ones who were empowering her to and kind of seizing on this kind of individual to place in the middle of their new kind of cult. It was interesting. The history there was very fascinating. But no, I think you're right. Ultimately, I think it got out of control. I think at some point they became obstinate. They became where they didn't want to give up.
A lot.
Yeah.
Oh, you kind of faded it out.
No, I think
a lot of my information from that period comes from Walter White, so it could be slanted. But his series Total Onslaught goes into the one of the videos. There's 39 videos. One of them is called The Islam Connection, and they go into great detail of how Islam was a creation of the Catholic Church, or members of the Catholic Church.
Yeah, I think originally they wanted to use that military power that the Arab and Persian nations kind of represented, and to use them to control the area of Jerusalem in the Middle East. But they ultimately didn't want to give it up. I think ultimately, if you look at the letters and the history, they didn't want to hand it over to the papacy, and they just kept it. So that's what brought on the Crusade Wars, when the Pope decided that he had to have his holy land, his holy city, and he couldn't leave it in the hands of the Muslims, so he went off to, they all went down to fight. The Crusade Wars.
Yeah, the Templar Knights were created for that. It's a change of subject, but the Pope sent some knights to Jerusalem, the Templar Knights, to protect the pilgrimers, or whatever you call it.
Mm-hmm.
And he only sent 9. And I always wondered about that. Why did he send just 9? He sent 9 knights to protect the Holy Land.
Right. Well, I think
and apparently they uncovered something. A lot of people speculate that they uncovered some of Solomon's riches, because they went down there and they were the poor knights, and they came back and they were international bankers.
Right. Undoubtedly so. And being able to transfer your wealth from place to place around around Europe, all around, and have it protected and secured, like like you think like a Brinks truck. And they had the knights ultimately developed the banking technology where you could use notes, where they would send one note to one Templar bank from one to the next, and you could transfer your wealth through their notary. So that whole process of using paper money or paper certifications of wealth was invented by them.
Notes.
Yep.
I have a couple of notes in my pocket.
Right. Exactly. So that's what it comes down to. Yeah, I mean they were so wealthy that ultimately, I think it was the King of France, Philip the Fair, and he helped to get his cousin install it as the Pope there, I think, and they worked together to take especially in France, obviously, in the area of France, they were able to take the Templars and really just rout them out. And so it was the famous grand head of the Grand Master, Demolay. Yeah, it comes to me. I could think of it. Yeah, I could think of it. I was kind of blanking, but yeah, Demolay was going to be burned at the stake. And so there was another order of knights created at that time. It was called the Hospitaller Knights. They were not Templars because they didn't protect the temple, but they were Hospitallers. They would hospital the pilgrims, and they would also protect them and like help them, assist them on their way to have pilgrimages. So this is the way that Romanism is very similar to Islam, is that they needed to also have pilgrimages to the Holy Land in order to like fulfill their duty to God and that kind of thing. So keeping the
special blessings,
right? Of course. So of course, if you remember the history of the Jesuits, Ignatius Loyola also made the famous trip to Jerusalem too. Found that it was very dangerous and it was full of Muslim fighters and so on. And came back, and he was not able to take the Holy Land for the Pope, but he said that he would set his order to do. That was one of their grand designs, was ultimately to try to take back the Holy Land for the Pope, and that's what they set out to do. And also their other grand design was to start the Counter-Reformation and roll back all the effects of the Protestant Reformation and democracy and the Enlightenment and Renaissance and freedom, from the people coming out of the Dark Ages. And so they wanted to roll back those effects and bring everyone back from voting for their leaders and having self-government and democracy, and they would bring them back into the bondage of monarchical lords and just serfdom, general serfdom and medieval poverty and so on. And of course, if you go back to the Dark Ages, as a serf, you were not allowed to read or question authority, or with the doctrine of prima nocta. Like when you got married, they had to have the royal So some rural nobility come down and bang your wife first before you got a chance to, in order to keep everything right in the universe, right? According to the Pope. And if you didn't like this, you were a heretic, and maybe they'd Braveheart you or whatever. But that's the system of dominance and tyranny that we fought against to escape here in America. Now, that's why there's a big red hat on America. That's why there's a big target on our back. Ultimately, because we resisted the power structure, and now we got to pay. So.
Well, it's odd that America was founded on the Pilgrims who were seeking religious freedom, and it wasn't long after they got here that they started. I think they killed 19 women witches.
Right.
They started the Inquisition here under Protestantism.
No, it's true. I think that I address that sometimes. I think that they came here with so much kind of PTSD and so much trauma from living for centuries under the medieval kind of like mindset, that when they got here, they saw witches under every bush. And so, you know what I mean? And I think so when Sarah Goodman or whatever, she saw blood in the milk or whatever happened, whatever kind of strange things happened, that they just kind of reverted back to their own way of doing business and trying to find something to burn at the stake. And yeah, it's a horrible tragedy, of course. And I don't think that there was any witches or there were any heretics. There were just people that were outcasts, or, you know what I mean?
I don't know if it's a rationalization, but it's theorized that it started up in America as a result of them eating bad bread with ergotine on it,
right? Which
is what LSD comes from.
Right. So ergot, so ergot, the little mold spores on the wheat, cause them to have a strange reaction and act strange, and then all of a sudden they were witches dancing with the devil in the moonlight or something. I gotcha. It reminds me of like North Korea today. North Korea today, the people are so terrorized by their government and so often murdered and raped by their government, and they're so often starving by famine that they'll go out and eat grass in the yard. They're so starved. So I mean, the extent to which you can push human beings through extreme terror and psychological torment is great. So that's the kind of religious power that I think when they got here, they were damaged. They were escaping here. They were coming here out of some great heroic cause. They were coming here because the land of Europe had become so reddened with the blood and the ashes of the heretics. And you got to remember, Rome was tormenting Christians when they were still Caesars. They were still putting them in the Colosseums to be burned for torches. And then that kind of transferred over later. The Pontifex Maximus, it kind of transfers over to the papacy in this priestcraft, and they're like Mithraic priests and druids of Rome, and they kind of take over, and they kind of like syncretize, so that they have this mirage of being Christian, a Christian church, the dominant Christian church over all others, of course, because they're Rome. And when they get to that point, then ultimately after the Crusades, the Inquisition's going to start up, and anyone who won't say their Hail Marys or go to Mass or pay Peter's pence, because that's what went to fund the Crusades. And if you didn't pay Peter's pence, boy, you might go into purgatory. So the whole system of Romanism is a series of intellectual and emotional and psychological traps,
warfare,
right? And so the process of coming out of that, I can't imagine. Martin Luther was this guy, this monk, so he comes along and he can read in Latin and he can read in Greek and German. And he's like this brilliant scholar in English. And finally he gets the old dusky New Testaments out and he gives them old looky-loo to see what it's all about. And suddenly he reads the articles of faith and the Gospels when no one else could, because they were in Latin. And he gets saved. And the information in the Gospels, that idea virus within him was so great that it started this huge revolution, so it's going to lead to John Huss and to John Calvin and to France and to England, and this whole kind of outbreak of men who are going to have the courage to say, wait a second, none of this Roman Pope king of the world doctrine of the Jesuits is in the Bible. It's not there. So it's interesting. It's an interesting and marvelous.
Help me with this. You made me think of this. It's something's Book of Martyrs. Who am I thinking of?
Oh, well, of course, it's the Foxe's Book of Martyrs.
Foxe's Book of Martyrs, yes. What a great book. Have you read it? Or I've read it. It's great.
Well, I had a bunch of quotes up here from it for the, just to look at, just to discuss the issue of Bartholemew, the Bartholemew Day Massacre. They had a whole bunch of really good quotes in the Foxe's Book of Martyrs, which I didn't know was really in there.
Wonder what would have happened if the gunpowder went off and blew up Parliament. I wonder how that would have turned out. Well, maybe in the multiverse, there's a universe where that happened.
Right. No, I think that too, and they definitely were going to set it off and kill them. I think you're right. I think Catesby and some of the other ones were starting to kind of go back on it, and they must have dithered, and they must have just, for a moment, they went and checked one more time and did a final security sweep, and they found it. But if you think about the Bartholemew Day Massacre, that did work. I mean, they did successfully murder all those Huguenots.
Yeah,
those damn dirty Protestants, right? They wanted to have religious freedom and pray how they wanted to, and of course that was just too much. And I just so happened to have this particular post up where we're looking at these Foxe's Book of Martyrs quotes here regarding the whole issue. Of course, in 1572, there was a medal struck by Gregory the 13th to commemorate the slaughter of 100,000 French Huguenot Christians. And of course, there's a grand painting commissioned by the Italian artist Vasari to paint a mural which still hangs in the Vatican today that commemorates and shows the greatness of the warriors of the Pope throwing Colonel Coligny out the window so he's murdered. And they're so thrilled with their murder. And so this is a case where they succeed in destroying the Reformers and the Protestants and the Huguenots, and instead of being found out and discovered early. Of course, this was going to happen in 1572, and this treachery and this traitorous murder of the Papists against the good-hearted reformers who thought that they were going to find some kind of peaceful accord were ultimately going to discover that they were going to be butchered. So, of course, following in 1605, the court of King First was going to be terribly suspicious. He wasn't going to just accept the idea that he was perfectly safe to go into Parliament and not be killed. He expected that the Jesuits were going to try to murder him, and he found out that he was right. In 1605, they discovered that the Jesuit treason and plot was to blow them up, and of course that would have ended the printing of the King James Bible some years later in 1611. So you see how all this is falling out. This is the foundational history of before, just as America is being born. So let's go to Foxe's Book of Martyrs here and read a fascinating quote. In the meantime, all the friends of Coligny were assassinated throughout Paris. Men, women, and children were promiscuously slaughtered, and every street was strewn with expired bodies. Some priests, holding up crucifixes in one hand and a dagger in the other, ran to the chiefs of the murderers and strongly exhorted them to spare neither relations nor friends. Foxe, Book of Martyrs. Here's another quote here. If you go to Reformation.org, it has this particular historical quote here. August 24th, 1572, the date of the infamous Bartholemew Day Massacre in France. On that day, over 400 years ago, began one of the most horrifying holocausts in history. The glorious Reformation began in Germany on October 31st, 1517, with Martin Luther had spread to France and was joyfully received. A great change had come over the people as industry and learning began to flourish, and so rapidly did the truth of the gospel spread that over a third of the population embraced the Reformed Christian faith. However, alarm bells began to ring at the Vatican. France was her oldest daughter and the main pillar and chief source of money and power. King Pepin of the Franks, the father of Charlemagne, had given of course, what turned out to be it was a fraudulent donation of Pepin, given the Papal States to the Pope almost 1,000 years earlier. Almost half the real estate in the country was owned by the clergy. Meanwhile, back in Paris, the King of France and his court spent their time drinking, reveling, and carousing. The court's spiritual advisor, a Jesuit priest, urged them to massacre the Protestants as penance for their many sins. To catch the Christians off guard, every token of peace and friendship and ecumenical goodwill was offered to deceive them. So you see what happened there? They were deceived by the Jesuits and by the aristocracy and by the princes and the royalty and the papists. During the summer of 1572, tens of thousands of Huguenots were lured to the city of Paris to witness the wedding on August 18th of Henry of Navarre, leader of the Huguenots, to Margaret, sister of the French king. So they thought they were safe. It goes on. This royal marriage alliance was supposed to end the wars of religion that had plagued France. Between 2 or 3 in the morning of the 24th August, the Popish feast day of St. Bartholemew, the papists rose up in a predetermined plan to slay the defenseless Protestants, wearing white armbands and with white crosses in their hats. For identity, they began their work of slaughter as the bells began to toll on the Roman Catholic Church of St. Arbois. Most prominent victim was the Huguenot leader, Admiral Coligny, whose body was mutilated by the assassins. For 3 days, the Protestants were hunted down and slain in the streets of Paris, until the river Seine ran red with their blood. Corpses blocked the doorways, mutilated bodies lay in every street and lane. By the 4th day of the fury of the assassins was satiated, almost every Protestant had been murdered. A dead silence fell over the Paris. Then the massacre began in other major towns, Lyons, Dieppe, Rouen, etc. It is estimated that 100,000 Huguenots perished. When the news of the butchery reached Rome, there were scenes of wild jubilation. A Te Deum was sung, and Pope Gregory issued a coin to commemorate the massacre. The Vatican was so jubilant, cannons roared, bells rung, and special commemorative medal was struck to honor the occasion. The Pope commissioned Italian artists to paint a grand mural of the massacre, which still hangs in the Vatican, as we said. The massacre on St. Bartholomew's Day are painted in the royal salon of the Vatican at Rome with the following inscription: Pontifex Coligny Necium Probo. And i.e. means the Pope approves of Coligny's death. Foxe, Book of Martyrs. Go on and read some more. At Augustobana, the people hearing of the massacre in Paris, they shut their gates that no Protestants might escape, and searching diligently for every individual of the Reformed Church, imprisoned them and barbarously murdered them. The same cruelty they practiced at Avaricum, at Troyes, and Toulouse, and Rouen, and many other places, running from city to city, towns, villages through the kingdom. Many of the wretched victims fled to the riverside, and some swam over the Seine to the suburbs of Saint-Germain. The king saw them from his window, which looked upon the river, and fired upon them with a carbine that had been loaded for the purpose by one of the pages. While the Queen Mother, undisturbed and serene in the midst of slaughter, looking down at the balcony, encouraged the murderers and laughed at the dying groans of the slaughtered, this barbarous queen was fired with a restless ambition, and she perpetually shifted her party in order to satiate it. Foxe, Book of Martyrs. Goes on and on. Goes on to do more and more of this history of the Catholic purges and the Catholic inquisitions and murder, religious murder against believers, against those who they proclaim are heretics, encouraged by priests. And it goes into the history of anti-Pavlik. And we have many quotes here, but the Croatian Catholic press described Pope Pius XII encouraging anti-Pavlik. The sovereign pontiff embraces the accomplishments of the great man. So it's exhausting, and it's just horrifying to understand. This is a system of geopolitical power, and it makes war against the saints of God, and it destroys them at will. And so when we're here in America, in the bastion of Protestant liberty and freedom, you have to understand that there's a target on America's back. There are secret terrorists who are working hard to go through other agencies and to work through third parties and to empower other political groups to fight and to give funds and resources to these other adjutants and provocateurs and street agitators. And they're there to cause the leaders and titans of industry, who are these knights of the Pope, the papal knights, who have everything to do with influencing international banking regulations, and they're creating a world where America is going to be totally destroyed. And it'll be something that's a betrayal, a deception. It'll be a grand massacre and democide on the scale of 1572 and the St. Bartholemew Day Massacre, a betrayal of such grand and horrifying proportions that no one remembers, and the attempt to do the same again in 1605 to the Protestant King James I. And so these are the kind of things we have to expect. If we're Protestants and we're men who believe the Bible, who have our relationship with God, who have the Baptist principles and history, I think this Constitution here in the United States of America, this freedom, is established out of this need for security, the ability to have arms, and to be able to fight and defend ourselves against these onslaughts of history. And it is a total onslaught. It's a total onslaught, and this is a segment that we'll add in there to discuss this in the show notes. So with that, we'll go ahead and wrap this up, this discussion. So in America, as we're starting to see that they're collapsing the currency, they're going to war, and overreaching, and our military lines are stretched too thin, and our resources are dwindling, and they're cutting off our ability to have baby formula and oil for our vehicles. They're beginning to have a great famine and a starvation. The World Health Organization is stepping in to have draconian lockdown measures that destroy our country. You have to see the grand scheme. You have to see the grand design is an effective stratagem of the Counter-Reformation. It's a ploy of the Vatican. It's a situation. It's a stratagem of the system of globalism that they're putting into place. So thank you for joining us, and we'll get back with you again soon.